Good morrow, my dear strangers. Let's see how I refined our cat house. In the previous episode, we went through the whole nightstand rebuild and transformation. Because it was seriously damaged by woodworms and it was missing few parts and others needed to be replaced. I had to craft all the pieces I needed and I fixed it all up. Under the supervision of our cookie, of course. Then I painted it with a dark brown rosewood color base paint to start with and decided where to put the kitty doors. Now it was time for all the finishing touches. I took all the measurements for the padding and insulation and cut the 3/4 of an inch rubber foam to pieces. I found out that cutting it with a sharp utility knife is a much better and neater option than using scissors. I was only sorry I couldn't use a thicker foam for better insulation, because it would take up too much of the inner space. I found some cheap but lovely heavy-duty fabric in my stash that I got on sale one time and decided to use it for the wall's padding. First, I cut and sewed 2 long sleeves that I filled each with 2 long side panels and 1 short panel in the middle. And I tested the perfect fit. Next, I measured the foam for the cushions. Of course, I was making everything twice, once for the top and once for the bottom apartment. At first, I was going to make the cushion covers from the same fabric as the padding, with the zipper. And I did. But then I changed my mind and decided to cut up a cheap but warm and fluffy blanket instead. That seemed to be much more comfy for the winter. I hemmed the raw edges with a flexible stitch and decided to skip the unnecessary zipper by making quick and easy envelope cushion cover. Of course, plain brown is not really a color for me. I think you know that by now. But because they sell only primary colors in my favorite heavy-duty line, I had to buy a can of blue, ivory, and green and mix my favorite tropical aqua shade. I made myself a handy mixing color chart so I could replicate the colors I like. I ended up using 2 parts of blue to 1 part of green, lightened with 4 parts of ivory. I tested the coverage on a stick and it was a pleasant surprise. As the first paint coat usually lifts up the fine wood hairs, it needs to be smoothed out with a fine sandpaper. You can tell when you wipe it with a tissue paper how rough it is. And you can imagine what a nightmare it would be to clean it like that. Then I wiped all the dust with a damp cloth. I also wanted to protect the cabinet feet from the ground moisture, so I marked the center of each foot and hammered little protectors in them. I know that plastic might be better, but I couldn't help it. Before painting the cat house with my lovely blue, I decided to wax it with a candle around the corners to get a chippy look later. I started with the blue lightly, almost dry brushing it to see how I liked it. And well, even though it wasn't bad, somehow it still wasn't what I wanted. So I decided to start over with a lighter background. This time, I painted the whole cat house with an old-fashioned cream color, not paying extra attention to a full coverage. After the paint dried, I tested the distress technique, where I applied the candle earlier. It worked well, so I applied more candle wax here and there, and finally painted the cabinet blue again. I didn't focus on a full coverage, since the cat house is already sufficiently weatherproof. But it still needed something, so I very lightly dry brushed it with a cream color, including the kitty shapes at the front. After the paint dried, I put the padding back inside, together with the new soft cushions. The next thing that came to my mind was the roof. I needed something removable for the bad weather. The easiest thing was to cut a piece of plywood and fit it with a thin strip of wood from the bottom, so it could hang over the cabinet backboard, right? Then I painted it with the weatherproof brown again. I used 2 coats for a full coverage. But still, it will need a little more than that. I went over all of my options and then went through my leftover piles. And the sheet metal windowsills seemed like a great choice. I found 2 pieces of almost perfect size, and they just need to be trimmed to size and finished. I didn't want to buy sheet metal bending pliers just for this project, so I borrowed a pair from a nice neighbor and decided to give it a try. I sort of improvised with preparing the corner for bending, and then clamped the sheet metal between 2 metal straight edges I found in my shop. Then I bent it by hand and tapped the edge straight with a rubber mallet. The second bend was trickier, but I've managed. It was not perfect, but it worked. My first sheet metal work with a steep learning curve. The sheet metal was a bit scuffed up to start with, from laying around for years. So I decided to give it some patina makeover. First, I cleaned and degreased it with a denatured alcohol, and selected this vintage wallpaper stencil together with a fusion mineral paint in Victorian lace. Then I dabbed the paint on with a sponge. If you want to avoid a bleed through, make sure not to overload your brush or sponge with paint. I didn't really care for a clean look, but if you do, and this happens to you, I have one technique that can make it look much better without overpainting the whole piece. Let me know in the comments. But meantime, I'd like to make name tags over the doors. I started simple and ended up designing intricate vintage Victorian design on my iPad. Then I printed it mirrored and transferred it onto the wood with a transfer medium, and started playing with my Dremel tool. I didn't do any planning here, so I just winged it, deciding to leave the letters and ornaments embossed and taking out all the spaces in between. I did most of it with just one cutting bit, but because I wasn't able to get into the details, I had to buy a finer cutting tip and then do the finishing touches. I made one for Cookie and one for his younger sister Pishta. My jigsaw needs a new blade. It ripped a few dings around the edges. Fortunately, this whole cat house is dinged up, so it fits well. I painted the name tags dark brown as a base color, and when the paint was mostly dry, I dry brushed it with the ivory and my aqua blue. And of course, I still wasn't happy with the ivory kitty cat cutouts. They were too empty, too harsh. So I decided to decorate them with IOD queen bee stamps and black ink. I also used some little butterflies I found in my stash. After the ink dried, I dry brushed some ivory and aqua blue back to mute the design. Now I'm finally happy with these. And it's time for a big reveal. There it is. Another little quick project gone wild. I'm still going to mute the stencil on the roof, but I better put it out there for the babies to use, or else I'll be removing the padding and making summer cushions instead. So, will the kitties move in? Or will I have to switch the name tags? Will I need to build an extra floor? If you enjoy my videos, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.